Well, for some analysis on that first debate, we speak to former U.S. diplomat and associate editor to the Daily Maverick, Brooks. Spector. Brooks, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, what a debate, right? You obviously would have needed to stay up at night with some coffee to watch it. But it's interesting for me that a lot of the conversation has been about not what has come out of it, and certainly the discussion, the policy direction and intentions from both leaders, but certainly just the quality of that debate. Let's start with Joe Biden. Questions being raised around just how clear he was during that debate. Kate Bedingfield is the former communications, head for Biden, and she herself said this was not a good debate for Biden. What did you make of his performance?
Well, I did get up and I watched it, and I had copious amounts of coffee. And it's absolutely clear that it was not Joe Biden's best day. It was certainly it was perhaps his worst day. And you can be overprepared and you can be flummoxed by the arrangements. But it was a series of missed chances on his part because there were no fact checkers among the moderators or facilitators. It was incumbent on Joe Biden to fact check all the truly rampant misstatements and lies and misapprehensions of his opponent, which he did not do. And he delivered a presentation of himself, which how shall we say it kindly, which reinforced the negative impression of him being too old and too infirm to act as president at a difficult time in the country's history. In his favor, we should add that the next day at a rally in North Carolina, he delivered a pretty good stump speech, and he was wildly and well applauded by a partisan crowd, and he made his points, but it was a day late and a dollar short in a way.
Yeah, I have to ask this because from a surface level and watching from a South African perspective, one wonders why Democrats would still put their energy behind Joe Biden when they do have a Kamala Harris in their midst.
Well, the dynamics of the political system in the U.S. are such that the incumbent president is effectively the head of his party, and it really is. It's up to him to decide whether or not he's going to be available as the candidate. Well, let's put it this way. It's up to Joe Biden and his wife, Jill Biden, to decide. If his wife were to whisper to him, Joe, I think it's time to go, it would be difficult for him to disagree with that. But in the absence of such a thing, there really is no way that the people who stand behind him and quote unquote below him can effectively push him out because he hasn't done anything illegal or wrong. He simply, on a televised debate, behaved in a particularly inept and awkward and less than effective manner. The vice president serves. After all, she was picked by Joe Biden to be his running mate, and she's not in a position to say, Joe, you've got to go. Just like none of the senators or congressmen or members of his cabinet or governors effectively have any way to lever him out of office. The circumstances were a little different if you think back in history to 1974 when Richard Nixon resigned from the presidency, but that was under the imminent threat of being both impeached and convicted for wrongdoing that had been amply demonstrated in a public way. This is different. This was ineptitude on a televised debate, with the associated feeling that he simply past his prime. And his answer in North Carolina and in the clip that you played just before we started talking, he made the point as best he could that he's slower than he used to be. He's not as effective as a debater as he used to be, but he still knows right from wrong, truth from falsehood. And he's in for the full game. Yeah. So that's where they are.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean? What do you make then of what this does and how I suppose it swings the pendulum, if you will, for Donald Trump, who after that debate seemed like a very emboldened former president?
Well, the one thing we can say is that this is, I mean, it feels like we've been at this presidential campaign and election process for forever. But remember, there's still months and months to go to November 5th. And there'll be a second debate, presumably, that was in the cards. Whether they're still going to do it is, obviously that's going to be decided down the road, perhaps. But many Americans are now taking advantage of the summer vacation schedule. And it is possible, and I underline the word possible, for them to excuse or to manage to forget a truly bad performance by Joe Biden this time around if he does well over the next couple of months as a campaigner, if he tackles Donald Trump effectively and persuasively, and if there is a second debate, he behaves like a new man.
Yeah. If we can perhaps start looking at what was actually said right in that debate. I mean, one of the things that I think stood out for me was when they started speaking about their international relations, if you will, right, and Donald Trump essentially saying to Joe Biden, we're heading towards World War III and you're driving us there. I mean, what do you make of that, considering just the massive, I suppose, trickle-down effect on a global scale some of those utterances really do have?
Well, what I make of Donald Trump's utterances about global affairs and international relations is that he is spectacularly uninformed and has been for a long time, and he's given to these apocalyptic statements, these wildly excessive utterances. I mean, putting aside the foreign affairs one, I mean, he charged the country was a failed state and was about to go over the edge of a precipice, that the economy was in a disastrous state. None of these things are true, but it doesn't matter because Donald Trump doesn't deal in truth. Donald Trump deals in television imagery and the ability to excite his followers with statements that are they may sound good to them, but belie the truth that underlies them. It's absolutely true that the country is facing numerous international relations challenges. I mean, you'd have to be truly ignorant not to notice that. That's different than saying that the country is about to fall into World War III. World War III with whom and against whom and why? That would be the questions that should have been asked, and why that statement could even be uttered. You could have easily said, putting yourself in Joe Biden's shoes, World War III with the Russians, World War III with the Chinese, World War III with Iran. Oh, come now, Donald, please.
I have to tell you that recently and in the run-up to these elections, of course, as the build-up continues, we recently spoke to the NAACP, for instance, and if you know the NAACP, that's an organization in the U.S. that has for decades advocated for the rights of black people in the U.S. And one of the things that stood out about that conversation was one of the former leaders of the NAACP saying that what's interesting about this election is the black vote seemingly leaning towards Donald Trump. What do you make of that?
I make of it the fact that statement is ahead of the evidence. Since 1932, the black voters in America and increasingly black voters in the South, once they were allowed to register and vote during the years of the civil rights struggle, have voted solidly for Democratic politicians and especially for Democratic presidents and presidential candidates. I think it is true that a certain section of the black population, just a certain section of the Hispanic American population, a certain section of the Jewish American population, you can tick it off as you go down the list of different ethnic groups and circumstances. Certain sections are in fact voting increasingly for Republicans, but the black vote in America has consistently been one of the real bulwarks of contemporary Democratic politicians. And all it really takes for somebody like Joe Biden to demonstrate is the way in which policy and sympathy and empathy come together in the service of and support of Black Americans' values, Black Americans' success, and Black Americans' advancement. And you look at the administration, the vice president is a person of color. A number of the leading Democrats in Congress, Jim Clyburn, for example, have been an enthusiastic supporter of I beg your pardon, of Joe Biden, really since he was vice president. I think when it comes down to it, a certain portion, what is it, 10%, 15%, maybe 20% will peel off and vote Republican, but that's part of the natural order of things too.